Good afternoon. Welcome to Northpoint of View. I'm here with Dr. Walter Kemmsies. Walter, how you doing?
Great. How are you?
I'm good, man. We're kicking off 2023. There's a lot going on. It's busy, but I think the watchword, at least in my mind, seems to be uncertainty.
I would completely agree with that.
Yeah, I mean the capital markets, while the stock markets had a nice sort of uptick or rebound in January, capital markets have stabilized. There seems to be though some underlying unrest, and I know at some point you're going to throw a rock at Jerome Powell's window. So let's go ahead and get started with it, right?
Yeah. Well, that's the whole problem. Right? For over a year, people have been talking about the recession. Like, what recession? Okay, the only places that I know where output is down is in automobiles because of a lack of parts.
Right.
When we started getting the chips, Russia invaded Ukraine, so all of those wires that we get from Russia and Ukraine haven't been arriving.
Right.
Some of them are getting snuck across Russia to go from some eastern location, Vladivostok, and over the Pacific to the West Coast. But it's been a struggle. So domestic car production down, car production in general around the world also down. But now that the parts are arriving, we're seeing production rates beginning to pick up. Where you can see that the most is the used car prices. They have really come off the boil, and so the new car prices should come down as well.
Yeah.
But it's not a contracting industry. It's an industry that's trying to get on its feet.
Right. I mean, yeah, just the whole untanglement of the supply chain issues. But to your point earlier, for the last 9 months, we're going to have a recession in the next 3 months.
Right.
And so, and it was in the paper again today.
Yeah. So the consensus forecasts indicate that the economists in general believe we're going to be in a recession, or they don't forecast a recession. They say we'll have GDP contraction in quarters 1, 2, and 3, and then an expansion in quarter 4. So implicitly, what they're suggesting is the Fed tightens to the point where they, crash the economy a little bit, and then they start cutting rates, and the economy picks back up steam in the fourth quarter. So that's the underlying assumption in the consensus thought process.
Right.
So the only problem is that Powell is concerned about inflation, as is Bullard, or Dullard, whatever his name is in Kansas, president of that one, is very vocal about it. But inflation actually peaked in June and July of last year. June was the CPI, and July was the peak for the personal consumption expenditure deflator. And it's that PCE deflator that the Fed targets. We just had the CPI numbers for December, and that came in at 6.5%. So that was a continued decline, and that's the headline number.
Yep.
And then we got the PCE deflator, and that came in at 4.2%. Now the Fed's target is 2 to 2.5% inflation. So that's the target. They think 4% is not good enough, but every month inflation drops, there's something called a lag effect.
Right.
And so I actually wrote my master's thesis on that. You have an impulse to the economy, and then the effect of that impulse on the economy starts, but not all of it happens at once. So it takes, somewhere between 2 and 6 quarters for 100% of the effect to work its way through. So
I think the technical term that I learned in college was the rat and the python.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to put it,
It takes a while to work its way through the system.
Yeah, that's right. It comes in big and leaves small.
Yeah.
So the problem here is the Fed is not giving the economy a chance.
Right.
And on top of it, what they're doing is counterproductive for 2 reasons. The first is we don't have a demand problem. Consumer spending really started to shift away from goods and towards services last year.
Right.
And every time we see consumer spending on goods wobble a little bit, everybody screams recession. That's not right. Overall consumer spending, however, did slow in the fourth quarter. But the key thing is that all of the things on the supply side that drove inflation, they've all peaked already.
Sure.
Wage growth peaked in March of last year at 5.6%, so it's working its way down. What I'm told by my supply chain executive friends is that the real issue they have these days is people not leaving for better wages, but people leaving for better benefits. Benefits can be a much bigger raise, depending on where you go. So I think the wage inflation story has peaked, and it will stay peaked. But I don't think we're going to get wage growth back below 4% again. And we can talk about this on another time.
And that sort of keeps that friction sort of alive with the Fed and the markets, right?
Exactly.
I mean,
exactly.
Because if they've made this commitment to this 2.5%, and if the floor is somewhere 3.5 to 4, then that tension creates that quote uncertainty that's sort of throughout the market right now.
Yeah, exactly. See, Powell is too old to be doing the job because in his head, it's 1982. The labor force is growing at 1.5% a year. Right now, the census forecast for the working age population next 10 years is like 0.2% per year. And that's for the working age population. You have to multiply that by 60%. That's the participation rate in the labor force. And you are just barely above 0.1%.
Yeah.
It's like 300,000 people a year joining the labor force. Last month, we hired 517,000 people. And so the reason we're really going to struggle here is we're running out of unemployed people to hire, and we don't have an immigration policy. And we have a bunch of technology automation technology that sort of works. So what we really need is a lot of investment in mechanization. That does work. It's where a human being kind of is assisted by a robot, or they can work from home with a virtual reality mask and a joystick and operate a forklift someplace. If you invest in enough of that, you could get more productivity, more labor force participation. But the problem is the Federal Reserve jacks interest rates up so much. The first thing to fall when the Fed did that was investment, plant equipment.
CapEx is...
Exactly. So they took that out. So that's a bad thing. What they want is to get inflation down to 2% and wage growth at 2%, which is effectively like zero gains for the American household. That's a feudal economy, Mark.
Right.
So what you want to do is stimulate investment. And investment raises labor productivity. And the more productive labor is, the more you can afford to pay them. That's a growth model. What this guy is doing is let's get close to a Great Depression, kind of a feeling. It's really sad. And all of the things that drove prices up, like more expensive truck rates because of excessive amounts of goods coming into the country, that's over with. Oil prices have come down off the boil. Natural gas prices came down. So, no. But so the uncertainty for this year is right now we think the Fed keeps hiking until it provokes a recession, and then it'll start cutting. But if the inflation numbers for January come in even better than December, they have no basis for raising rates.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden, the view might not be recession anymore. So like you said in the beginning, this is a year of uncertainty.
Well, at that, Walter, we'll tackle the labor and home building in our next two podcasts. Always great to be with you, man.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Take care.
Have a great day.
You guys.